Look at any photo of the Sahara Desert, endless sand, brutal sun. One of the most lifeless places on Earth. Now imagine that same landscape covered in lakes, rivers, forests, and grasslands. Imagine hippos swimming where camels now trudge. Crocodiles basking where nothing survives today. It sounds impossible, but just 6,000 years ago, that is exactly what the Sahara looked like. The Green Sahara. It is one of the most dramatic climate transformations in recent Earth history. A region the size of the United States went from paradise to wasteland in what amounts to a geological instant, and the people who lived through it had to make an impossible choice: adapt or die. If you are settling in for the night, this is perfect company. The story of how climate change created an entire way of life, how humans became desert nomads because they had no other choice. It has been shaping cultures for thousands of years. Subscribe and stick around. The evidence for the Green Sahara is overwhelming. Rock art scattered across the desert shows people swimming, fishing, hunting hippos and crocodiles and elephants, animals that need abundant water to survive, animals that couldn't exist in today's Sahara for even a single day. Archaeologists have found hippopotamus bones in places that haven't seen water for millennia. Crocodile remains in regions where the nearest river is hundreds of miles away. Fish hooks and harpoons in areas surrounded by nothing but sand. The physical evidence is undeniable. Water was here, life was here, and then it wasn't. The transformation began around 5,500 years ago. Before that, the Sahara had been green for roughly 5,000 years. Lakes covered areas that are now the driest places on Earth. Rivers flowed through what is now empty sand sea. Humans thrived in a landscape unrecognizable to anyone alive today. Lake Chad was one of the largest freshwater lakes in the world. At its peak, it covered an area larger than all the Great Lakes combined. Today, Lake Chad is a shrinking puddle, barely visible compared to its ancient glory. The transformation is almost beyond comprehension. How did this happen? The answer lies in Earth's orbit. Our planet doesn't orbit the sun in a perfect circle. It wobbles. The angle of its axis shifts over thousands of years, and these small changes have dramatic effects on where rain falls and where deserts form. During the Green Sahara period, Earth's orbit brought stronger summer monsoons to North Africa. Moisture from the Atlantic and Indian Oceans pushed deep into the continent. Rain fell where no rain falls today, and where rain falls, life follows. The people who lived in this green paradise had no idea it would end. They built permanent settlements, developed sophisticated cultures, created art that still survives on rock faces throughout the region. They assumed the water would always be there. They were wrong. The drying began slowly. At first, it was probably imperceptible. A dry year here, a shorter rainy season there. Lakes that didn't quite refill to their previous levels. Rivers that flowed a little less strongly, nothing alarming. Just subtle changes that accumulated over generations. But then the changes accelerated. Climate systems have tipping points. Once certain thresholds are crossed, change becomes self-reinforcing. Less vegetation means less moisture recycled into the atmosphere. Less moisture means less rain. Less rain means less vegetation. A vicious cycle that feeds on itself. Within just a few centuries, the green Sahara was gone. Lakes that had existed for thousands of years dried up completely. Rivers stopped flowing. Forests gave way to grassland, then to scrub, then to bare sand. The transformation was catastrophically fast in geological terms, and the people who lived there had to respond. This is where the story becomes deeply human. Not abstract climate data, but real people facing an existential crisis. Their world was literally disappearing around them. What would you do? Some groups moved east, toward the Nile Valley. The river was still flowing. The land was still green. Archaeological evidence shows a sudden population increase in Egypt around this time. Refugees from the drying Sahara, seeking water and survival. Some researchers believe this influx of people helped spark Egyptian civilization. The population pressure forced new forms of organization, new technologies for managing limited resources, new social structures to coordinate large numbers of people. The refugees didn't just find a new home. They helped build one of history's greatest civilizations. But not everyone went to the Nile. Some groups moved south, following the retreating rains toward tropical Africa. Others went north, to the Mediterranean coast. And some stayed. They refused to leave the land their ancestors had inhabited for generations, and they adapted to the new reality. The people who stayed became the ancestors of today's desert nomads. The Tuareg, the Berbers, the Bedouin, cultures that learned to survive in one of the harshest environments on Earth. Not because they chose it, but because they refused to leave. Think about what that adaptation required. Everything about how they lived had to change. Settlements became impossible without permanent water. Agriculture became impossible without rain. The entire economic and social system that had sustained them for thousands of years was suddenly obsolete. They learned to follow water instead of waiting for it. Nomadism wasn't a choice. It was a survival strategy forced upon them by circumstances. Move with the seasons, follow the rare rains. Know where the hidden oases are. Keep moving or die. They domesticated camels, animals perfectly adapted to desert conditions. Camels can go days without water. They can eat plants that would kill other livestock. They can carry heavy loads across terrain that would destroy horses or cattle. Without camels, survival in the Sahara would have been nearly impossible. The relationship between humans and camels became so close that it shaped entire cultures. Wealth was measured in camels. Social status depended on camel herds, marriage customs, inheritance laws, even poetry and music revolved around these animals that made desert life possible. But here is the thing that often gets overlooked. The desert nomads didn't just survive, they thrived. They developed sophisticated knowledge systems for navigating featureless landscapes. They created trading networks that connected sub-Saharan Africa to the Mediterranean. They built cultures of remarkable richness and complexity. The trans-Saharan trade routes became some of the most important commercial pathways in the ancient world. Gold and salt and slaves and ideas flowed across the desert. Cities grew at oasis stops along the way. The wasteland became a highway connecting civilizations. Timbuktu, often invoked as a symbol of remoteness, was actually a major center of learning and commerce. Scholars came from across the Islamic world to study there. Libraries held thousands of manuscripts. The desert hadn't isolated these communities. It had connected them in ways that fertile lands couldn't. This is the strange paradox of the Saharan transformation. A climate catastrophe that destroyed one way of life created another. The people who adapted to the desert didn't just survive. They built something new, something that couldn't have existed in the green Sahara. The trading networks required the desert. If the Sahara had remained green, there would have been no need for camel caravans, no incentive to develop the navigation techniques, no oasis cities serving as rest stops. The desert created opportunities that the paradise hadn't offered, but we shouldn't romanticize this too much. Countless people died during the transition. Communities that couldn't adapt or couldn't move simply perished. The archaeological record shows abandoned settlements throughout the Sahara, places where people tried to stay and failed. The genetic evidence tells a similar story. Population studies show dramatic declines in North African ancestry around the time of the Saharan drying. Lineages that had thrived for thousands of years simply disappeared. The survivors were the exceptions, not the rule, and the trauma of that transition echoes in the cultures that emerged from it. Desert peoples have long memories. Their oral traditions speak of a time when water was abundant, when life was easier, when the land itself was different. The green Sahara lives on in stories passed down for thousands of years. Some scholars believe that memories of the green Sahara influenced mythology across the region. The Garden of Eden, Paradise Lost, a golden age when the world was abundant and humanity fell from grace. These stories might carry echoes of real climate change experienced by real people thousands of years ago. If you are still with me, consider what the green Sahara tells us about human adaptability. When faced with existential environmental change, some people found ways to survive. They didn't just endure. They created new cultures, new technologies, new ways of being human. But adaptability has limits. Not everyone made it. Not every community found a way through. The Saharan transformation was survivable for some, but it wasn't gentle. It extracted a tremendous human cost, even as it shaped new ways of life. And here is the uncomfortable parallel to our own time. We're living through climate change right now, not as dramatic as the Saharan transformation, at least not yet, but significant enough to force adaptations, to displace populations, to remake landscapes and livelihoods. The people who lived through the Saharan drying didn't know they were part of a major climate shift. They just knew the rains were failing, the lakes were shrinking, the world they'd known was changing. Sound familiar? We have advantages they didn't: scientific understanding, global communication, the ability to see what is coming and plan for it. But we also face challenges they didn't. Billions more people, a global economy that is harder to relocate. Technologies that require stable infrastructure. The Saharan transformation took centuries to complete. That is slow by human standards, but fast by geological ones. Our current climate change is happening even faster. The question of whether we can adapt as successfully as the desert nomads did remains open. But let's return to the Green Sahara itself, because the story doesn't end with the drying. The desert has memory. Hidden beneath the sand, evidence of the green past persists. And occasionally, that past surfaces in remarkable ways. In 2000, satellites detected a vast network of ancient river channels beneath the Saharan sand. Rivers that haven't flowed for thousands of years, preserved as traces in the bedrock. The ghost of a hydrological system that once made the desert bloom. These fossil rivers extend for hundreds of miles. They connected lakes that no longer exist. They watered landscapes that are now utterly barren. Looking at the satellite images, you can almost see the Green Sahara resurrecting itself before your eyes. Some researchers believe these ancient aquifers still hold water, trapped underground for millennia. The Nubian sandstone aquifer alone contains enough water to cover the entire African continent to a depth of several feet, a remnant of the Green Sahara waiting beneath the desert. Libya and Egypt have both tapped these fossil aquifers for irrigation. The Great Man-Made River project in Libya pumps ancient water hundreds of miles through massive pipelines. It is controversial. The water isn't being replaced. Once it is gone forever. They're mining the Green Sahara's legacy. But the water is real. It reminds us that the Sahara hasn't always been dead, that beneath the surface, traces of abundance persist, that the desert is a temporary condition, at least on geological timescales. The Green Sahara might return someday. Climate models suggest that the conditions that created the Green Sahara will recur. Earth's orbital cycles continue. In roughly 15,000 years, the same alignment that brought monsoons to North Africa will occur again. The desert might bloom once more. Of course, 15,000 years is a long time to wait. Entire civilizations rise and fall in shorter spans. Whoever is alive when the Sahara greens again, if anyone is, will be as different from us as we are from the people who first witnessed its drying. But here is something strange. The Sahara has greened and dried multiple times in the past few 100,000 years. It is not a single event, but a recurring cycle. The people who lived through the most recent drying weren't the first to face that challenge. Earlier human populations witnessed earlier transformations. Homo sapiens in Africa experienced at least one previous green period before the most recent one, and possibly Homo erectus or other species experienced even earlier cycles. The Sahara has been testing human adaptability for a very long time. Each time, some humans adapted, moved, changed their way of life, survived. The fact that we're here at all proves that our ancestors made it through these transformations. We're descended from the survivors. Their adaptability is our inheritance. If you are drifting off now, let that thought comfort you. You come from survivors. People who faced climate catastrophes and found ways through. Whatever challenges our era presents, we have the genetic and cultural heritage of people who survived worse. The desert nomad cultures that emerged from the Saharan transformation are still with us today, modified by modernity, challenged by borders and politics and changing economics, but still carrying knowledge and traditions developed over 5,000 years of desert survival. The Tuaregs still navigate by stars and wind patterns. The Berbers still know which plants can sustain life in impossible conditions. The Bedouins still read the desert like a book written in sand and stone. This knowledge wasn't learned in schools. It was earned through millennia of survival, and this knowledge is increasingly valuable. As climate change makes more regions arid, the lessons learned in the Sahara become relevant worldwide. How do you live with less water? How do you remain mobile when conditions shift? How do you build culture in hostile environments? The desert nomads know things the rest of us forgot or never learned. Their cultures are repositories of hard-won wisdom about survival in extreme conditions. As conditions become more extreme elsewhere, that wisdom becomes precious. But these cultures are also threatened. Modern borders restrict nomadic movement. Climate change makes even desert-adapted lifestyles harder. Young people leave for cities, abandoning traditional knowledge. The very cultures created by the Saharan transformation might not survive the modern one. There is irony in this. Climate change created these cultures, and climate change, in its modern form, might destroy them. The adaptation that worked for 5,000 years might not work for the next 50. Even the most resilient cultures have limits. But perhaps that is too pessimistic. Cultures adapt. They always have. The desert nomads of today aren't identical to those of 1,000 years ago, who weren't identical to those of 3,000 years ago. Change is constant. What matters is whether the core knowledge survives, and some of that knowledge is being documented now. Anthropologists and historians work with desert communities to record traditional practices, not to freeze them in time, but to preserve options for the future. Knowledge that might be essential someday shouldn't be lost to forgetting. The Green Sahara is gone. It has been gone for 5,000 years and won't return for 15,000 more. But its legacy persists in the people who adapted to its disappearance, in the cultures that found ways to thrive in its absence, in the knowledge passed down through hundreds of generations. When you look at desert nomads today, you are looking at living monuments to climate adaptation. Every practice, every tradition, every piece of knowledge represents a solution to problems posed by the Saharan transformation. They are the answer to a question asked 5,000 years ago, and they carry something else too. Memories, stories, the cultural echo of a world that no longer exists. When a Tuareg elder speaks of the old days, they're drawing on oral traditions that stretch back to when the Sahara was green. The memory persists even when the reality is gone. Some of those stories have been recorded, fragments of mythology that speak of abundant water, of easy times, of a world transformed by divine displeasure or cosmic cycles. The scientific story and the cultural story aren't identical, but they point to the same events. The Green Sahara remembered through different lenses. If you are still awake, consider the responsibility this creates. We're the generation that can connect these stories, that can read the rock art and the fossil riverbeds and the genetic data and the oral traditions together, that can understand the Green Sahara more completely than any generation before. We can see what those ancient people couldn't. The orbital cycles that drove the change, the global climate patterns that determined where rain would fall, the feedback loops that accelerated the transformation. We have a perspective they lacked, even though they lived through it. But they knew things we don't. What it felt like, what the lakes looked like before they dried, what species lived there that left no fossils, the names they gave to places now nameless, the personal stories of individuals who faced the transformation and responded. Between their experiential knowledge and our scientific knowledge, something like a complete picture emerges. The Green Sahara as both lived reality and reconstructed history. The transformation as both human drama and climate data. The desert nomads as both cultural achievement and survival strategy. That is worth remembering as you drift into sleep. The story of the Green Sahara is a collaboration across time. Ancient people lived it. Medieval scholars preserved fragments. Modern scientists reconstruct it, and future generations will add their understanding to ours. The Sahara was green. It dried, people adapted, cultures formed, knowledge accumulated. And here we are, 5,000 years later, still telling the story, still learning from it, still carrying the lessons forward. Tomorrow the desert will still be there, harsh, unforgiving, beautiful in its own severe way. And somewhere in that desert, people will be practicing survival techniques developed over millennia, carrying knowledge that their ancestors paid for with hardship and death. Thanks for spending this time with the Green Sahara, with the climate shift that transformed a paradise into a wasteland and forced humans to become something new, with the desert nomads who turned catastrophe into culture. Subscribe and stick around for more journeys into the parts of history shaped by forces beyond human control. More stories of adaptation and survival. More evidence that humans can endure more than we usually give ourselves credit for. Sleep well tonight. And if you dream of water in the desert, you are dreaming of something real, something that existed, something that might exist again. Long after we're gone, the Green Sahara lives on in dreams and genes and knowledge passed through time. Good night from the desert that was once a garden, from the people who learned to live without water, from the cultures that turned survival into art. Their story is part of your story now. Carry it well. The Sahara was green. Now it is not. Someday it will be again, and humans will be there, adapting, surviving, making something new from whatever the climate gives them. That is what we do. That is who we are. Good night. But before you drift away completely, there is more to this story worth exploring. The Green Sahara didn't just create desert nomads. It shaped the course of human civilization in ways we're still discovering. Consider agriculture. The domestication of cattle in Africa appears to have happened during the Green Sahara period. People living around the abundant lakes and grasslands began keeping livestock, not because they had to, but because they could. The environment made it possible. When the Sahara dried, those cattle-keeping traditions moved with the refugees. Some went to the Nile Valley, bringing their livestock practices with them. Others went south into sub-Saharan Africa. The pastoralist cultures that spread across the continent carried seeds planted in the Green Sahara. The Maasai of East Africa, the Fulani of West Africa, the Dinka of South Sudan. These pastoral peoples trace their cultural roots back through traditions that developed when the Sahara was green. The climate transformations scattered their ancestors across a continent, but the core practices survived. And it wasn't just cattle. Evidence suggests that some of the earliest pottery in Africa was made by green Sahara populations before agriculture, before cities. People around the ancient lakes were firing clay into durable vessels. The technology spread with the refugees. Pottery allowed food storage. Food storage allowed surplus accumulation. Surplus accumulation allowed social complexity. The chain of consequences stretches from green Sahara lake shores to the pyramids of Egypt. Everything connected through the people who had to flee. Some researchers believe writing itself might trace back to the Saharan transformation. The sudden need to manage refugee populations, to coordinate resource distribution, to keep track of who owned what in communities swelling with newcomers. Necessity driving invention. This is speculative, but the timing is suggestive. Writing emerged in Mesopotamia and Egypt around the time climate refugees would have been arriving. The organizational pressures created by the transformation might have pushed humans toward literacy. And then there is religion. The transformation of the Sahara was so dramatic, so devastating, that it must have demanded explanation. Why was paradise being taken away? What had people done to deserve this? How should they respond to divine or cosmic displeasure? Some scholars see echoes of the Saharan transformation in flood myths worldwide. Not literal floods, but cultural memories of environmental catastrophe so severe that it seemed like the end of the world. The Green Sahara ending might have been one source for these universal stories. The point is that the Saharan transformation wasn't just a regional event. It sent shockwaves across Africa and beyond. It displaced populations that went on to shape civilizations. It created cultural patterns that persist today. It might have influenced religion and writing, and the very structure of human societies. When you think about it this way, the Green Sahara becomes one of the most important environments in human history. Not because of what happened there, but because of what happened when it ended. The destruction was creative, the catastrophe was generative. And this raises uncomfortable questions about how we think about environmental change. We naturally view it as negative loss, destruction, the end of good things. But the Saharan transformation shows that endings can also be beginnings. That destruction creates as well as destroys. This doesn't mean climate change is good. The human cost of the Saharan transformation was enormous. People died. Cultures vanished. Landscapes that had sustained life for millennia became hostile. The creative outcomes don't justify the suffering that preceded them, but it does mean that human responses to environmental change are more complex than simple survival or extinction. People don't just endure. They create, they innovate, they find opportunities in catastrophe. Even the worst disasters produce unexpected outcomes. The desert nomads who emerged from the Saharan transformation exemplify this. They didn't just survive the desert, they mastered it. They found ways to thrive that had never existed before. They created cultures of remarkable sophistication in one of the harshest environments on Earth. Their trade networks eventually connected civilizations across thousands of miles. Their navigation techniques remain impressive even today. Their social structures allowed cooperation between strangers in places where cooperation was essential for survival. They invented solutions to problems no one had ever faced before, and they developed a relationship with their environment that we might call sustainable. Desert nomads couldn't overexploit their resources the way agricultural societies sometimes did. The desert enforced limits, exceed them, and you died. This brutal feedback loop created cultures that respected environmental constraints. There is a lesson there too. Maybe about how human societies relate to their environments. The green Sahara populations didn't see the transformation coming. They assumed the abundance would last forever. They were wrong. The desert taught their descendants humility. We make similar assumptions today about water availability, about climate stability, about the permanence of conditions that are actually temporary. The green Sahara reminds us that environments change, sometimes slowly, sometimes catastrophically, always eventually. The question isn't whether our environment will change. It is how we'll respond when it does. Will we adapt like the desert nomads? Will we flee like the refugees to the Nile? Will we perish like the communities that couldn't adjust? The Saharan transformation shows all three outcomes are possible, and it shows something else too. The response isn't predetermined. Different groups facing the same transformation responded differently. Some adapted, some fled, some died. The outcome depended on choices, on flexibility, on luck, on countless factors we can't fully reconstruct. This might be the most important lesson of the Green Sahara. Environmental change doesn't determine human outcomes. It creates pressures, closes some options, opens others. But within those constraints, human creativity still matters. Choices still matter, culture still matters. The desert nomads weren't destined to emerge from the Saharan transformation. They created themselves through countless decisions, large and small, over many generations. They chose to stay. They chose to adapt. They chose to master the desert rather than surrender to it. And we have the same capacity. Whatever environmental changes our era brings, we're not passive recipients, we're active participants. We can choose how to respond. We can develop new technologies, new social arrangements, new ways of living that make the best of difficult circumstances. This isn't naive optimism. Not everyone will make it. Not every community will adapt successfully. The Saharan transformation proves that clearly enough, but some will. Some always have. The human species has survived ice ages and supervolcanic eruptions and countless other challenges. We're still here. The Green Sahara is gone. But its legacy lives on in desert cultures, in pastoral traditions, in agricultural practices that spread with climate refugees thousands of years ago. The transformation shaped the world we inherited. Understanding it helps us understand ourselves, and it gives us models, examples of how people responded to environmental catastrophe, both successes and failures, both adaptations that worked and traditions that couldn't adjust. A library of strategies developed over 5,000 years of desert survival. Some of those strategies are being revived. Now, drought-resistant crops, water conservation techniques, mobile lifestyles that don't depend on fixed infrastructure, knowledge that seemed obsolete a generation ago is becoming relevant again as climate change accelerates. The desert nomads knew how to live with less water than most of us imagine possible. They knew how to find food in places that seemed completely barren. They knew how to organize societies that could move with changing conditions. That knowledge took thousands of years to develop. It shouldn't be lost, but it is being lost. The traditional nomadic lifestyles are harder to maintain each generation. Young people leave for cities. Borders restrict movement. Climate change makes even desert-adapted techniques fail in places they've worked for millennia. The very cultures created by the Saharan transformation face extinction. There is bitter irony in this. Climate change created these cultures. Climate change, in its modern accelerated form, might destroy them. The adaptation that worked for 50 centuries might not survive the next 50 years. But cultures are resilient too. They adapt just as individuals do. The desert nomads of 2025 aren't identical to those of 2500 BCE. They've absorbed new technologies, new ideas, new challenges. They've changed while maintaining something essential. Perhaps they'll continue to adapt. Perhaps the core knowledge will survive in new forms. Perhaps the lessons of the Green Sahara transformation will remain available to future generations who might need them desperately. If you've made it this far, you are part of keeping those lessons alive. The story of the Green Sahara, of the transformation, of the cultures that emerged. By knowing it, you carry it forward. That is how cultural knowledge survives. Person to person, generation to generation. Tomorrow you might not remember all the details. That is fine. What matters is the shape of the story. Paradise lost. Adaptation required. Cultures created. Knowledge accumulated. Lessons available. That shape is worth remembering, even if the specifics fade. The Sahara was green. Humans thrived there. Then it dried. Some humans adapted. They became desert nomads. Their cultures still exist. Their knowledge still matters. And their story reminds us that environmental change is survivable, if we're willing to change too. That is worth carrying into your dreams tonight. The possibility of adaptation. The reality of survival. The evidence that humans can endure what seems unsurvivable and create something new on the other side. The desert will still be there tomorrow, harsh and beautiful, testing those who try to live in it, teaching lessons to those willing to learn, carrying the memory of water in its fossil rivers and underground aquifers. And somewhere in that desert, someone will be practicing skills passed down for 5,000 years, navigating by stars, reading weather in the behavior of animals, finding water where no water seems to exist, living proof that the Green Sahara's legacy endures. Thanks for spending this time in the desert that was once a garden, in the transformation that shaped continents, in the cultures that turned catastrophe into creativity. It has been quite a journey through time and climate. Subscribe and stick around for more explorations of how climate shaped human history, more stories of adaptation and survival, more evidence that we're part of something much larger and longer than any individual life. Sleep well. Dream of green places turning gold, of water disappearing and people learning to live without it. of cultures born from crisis and knowledge forged in hardship. It is all part of your story now. Good night from the Sahara, from the nomads who mastered it, from the water that once was and will be again. The desert keeps its secrets well, but some of them, tonight, became yours. The Sahara was green. Remember that. It changes everything about how we see the world's largest desert. And it reminds us that nothing is permanent. Not paradise, not wasteland, not anything at all. Good night. Actually, there is one more dimension to this story that deserves exploration. The Green Sahara wasn't just an environmental event, it was a human event. And the human dimension is where the mystery gets most personal. Imagine being a child in the Green Sahara around 5,800 years ago. Your grandparents tell stories of lakes that stretch to the horizon, of hippos that your great-grandfather hunted. You've never seen a hippo. The lakes you know are smaller than the ones in the stories. But you don't think much about it. That is just how life is. Then you grow up, have children of your own. The lakes you knew as a child have shrunk noticeably. The fish are harder to catch. The grasses don't grow as thick. You tell your children about the abundant times of your youth. They look at you skeptically, surely you are exaggerating. Each generation experiences this. Each generation's normal is the previous generation's decline. No single lifetime sees the full transformation, but accumulate those lifetimes, and paradise becomes desert. The change that seems imperceptible in individual lives proves catastrophic across generations. This is called shifting baseline syndrome. Each generation accepts the environment they're born into as the standard. They don't perceive the degradation that preceded them. They can't miss what they never knew. The loss becomes invisible because memory doesn't span generations effectively. The Green Sahara populations experienced this in slow motion over centuries. The transformation was fast in geological terms, but slow in human terms. Nobody alive when the desert finally dominated had any living memory of the lakes and forests. The green paradise existed only in increasingly distant stories. We experience the same phenomenon today. Children born in the 2020s will never know coral reefs as their grandparents knew them. They won't miss the species that went extinct before they were born. Their baseline will be our decline, and their children's baseline will be their decline. The Green Sahara warns us about this, about how loss can be normalized, about how each generation can accept a little less without realizing what is being lost, about how paradise can become desert one lifetime at a time. But there is another side to this story. Oral traditions can span the gaps that individual memory cannot. The desert nomads preserved stories of the Green Sahara for thousands of years. They remembered what their distant ancestors had experienced, even when no one alive had seen it. These stories weren't just nostalgia. They were practical. They told people that the desert wasn't permanent, that conditions had been different before and might be different again, that the harsh environment was a phase, not the natural state of things. Knowing that the Sahara was once green might have helped people endure its harshness. If your ancestors thrived in this place, maybe you can too. If the desert is temporary, maybe your suffering is meaningful. Stories can sustain people through conditions that would otherwise break them. This is something we've lost in modern culture. We have scientific knowledge of past climates, but not the cultural integration of that knowledge. We know the facts without feeling their weight. The green Sahara is a curiosity to us, not a lived memory embedded in our sense of identity. Maybe we need to change that. Maybe understanding climate history should be part of how we understand ourselves. Not just data points, but stories, not just graphs, but narratives that connect us to the people who came before and the people who will come after. Desert nomads achieved this. Their identity was bound up with the transformation that created them. They knew where they came from and why they lived as they did. That knowledge grounded them, made them resilient, connected them to something larger than individual survival. We could learn from them, not just their practical survival techniques, though those are valuable too, but their sense of being part of a long story, of having inherited something precious, of being responsible for passing it on. That is what the Green Sahara story offers. Ultimately, not just facts about climate change in the past, but a way of thinking about our place in time, about what we've inherited, about what we're responsible for, about what we'll pass on. You are part of this chain whether you realize it or not. You inherited a world shaped by climate changes you never witnessed. You'll pass on a world shaped by climate changes you are living through. Your choices, your adaptations, your creativity will matter to people you'll never meet. The Green Sahara populations didn't know they were shaping civilizations. They were just trying to survive. But their survival strategies, accumulated over generations, became the cultural inheritance of millions of descendants. Their struggles became our foundation. The same will be true of us. The adaptations we develop now will be inherited by future generations. The knowledge we preserve or lose will shape possibilities we can't imagine. We're not just responding to our present, we're creating someone else's past. That is a heavy thought to fall asleep with. Maybe too heavy. So let's end with something lighter. The Green Sahara existed. It was beautiful. People lived good lives there, and when it ended, some of them found ways to live good lives in what came next. That is not a tragedy. That is a triumph. Not despite the hardship, but through it. The desert nomads didn't just survive. They found meaning, built community, created beauty, passed on wisdom. Everything that makes human life worthwhile, they achieved in one of the hardest places on earth. If they could do that, maybe we can too. Whatever our environment throws at us, whatever adaptations we're forced to make, the human capacity for finding meaning doesn't depend on comfortable conditions. It might even flourish under pressure. So rest now. Let the Green Sahara fade into dreams. Let the desert nomads keep watch. You are part of their story now, part of the long human saga of adaptation and survival, and creating something new from whatever circumstances provide. Tomorrow the world will still be changing. The climate will still be shifting. Challenges will still be accumulating. But you'll face them as humans have always faced challenges, with creativity, with community, with the strange, stubborn hope that refuses to die no matter how hard conditions become. The Sahara was green, now it is not. Someday it will be again between those green periods. Life finds a way that is the message from 5,000 years of desert survival. Life finds a way, humans find a way we always have. Good night. Dream of water in dry places, of green memories under golden sand, of people who adapted when paradise ended and built something remarkable in the absence. Their story is a gift. Carry it well. The climate shift that created desert nomads. One of history's great transformations. Now part of your mental library, use it wisely, share it generously, and remember that nothing is permanent except change itself. Good night from the Sahara that was green, is golden, and will be green again. From everyone who lived through the transformation, and everyone who inherited its lessons, sleep well. The desert watches over its children, past and present and future. Good night.